Everyone, this is what your pastor didn't tell you. Now, some people might have heard that the Southern Baptist Convention, the SBC, the organization that kicked out Rick Warren and Saddleback Church for having a women pastor, that they did a vote recently in 2024, about a month ago. And a lot of people have said stuff like, hey, they concluded that women can still be pastors, or that they rejected complementarianism. Some people said this is a really big deal. They did reject a vote, and in short, to be quite honest, nothing really happened. And they still don't want women to be pastors, but we're going to talk about the specifics of actually what happened. What really happened? What really happened today? But before we do that, let's actually talk about what the Southern Baptist Convention is. So, for people that aren't aware, this is the largest Protestant denomination in the United States. So it's not a like a convention where people will come together. It's an actual denomination. They have a conference once a year. They're in charge of a whole bunch of conservative churches. It has the power to kick lots of churches out, the bad ones, the naysayers, the in this case ones that reject women pastors, or ones that accept women pastors. They'll kick them out, like Rick Warren's church. And they're in charge of seminaries. So this is important, of course, because that's where we get a lot of our resources about text to understand the Bible. And they're in charge of what the seminary students learn. Now, leading up to the vote that happened about a month ago, Mike Law said this. He said, if we won't stand on this issue and be unapologetically biblical, then we won't stand on anything. So he's like, hey, if we don't vote for this right here, what we're going to do here in this time period at the Southern Baptist Convention, that this is the Bible or nothing. We're not going to stand for anything else. And he later says, Southern Baptists are facing a decisive moment, he said in a video on a pro-amendment website as reported by AP News. Here's the trajectory of doing nothing. Soon, Southern Baptist churches will start openly supporting homosexual clergy, same-sex marriage, and eventually transgenderism. On his blog, Denny Burke, who some people might be familiar with, he notes that Eric Erickson has an open letter exhorting Southern Baptists to vote for the Law Amendment. The Law Amendment, that's the vote that the Southern Baptist Convention had. He points that all the sad examples of denominations that have begun with female pastors and have ended up affirming LGBTQ. There's a long list, and the sad stories are all too familiar by now. So he's like, if you don't vote against these churches having women's pastors, then we're going to have all these churches that are going into accepting homosexuality and all the terrible stuff that liberal Christians believe today. So they had the vote, okay? And there's been a lot of confusion, as you can tell. What actually happened? So this is from Todd Gray. Links are in the description. But he made a clarifying statement, okay? So he says, we rejected a clarifying amendment. The messengers did not reach the required 2/3 majority needed to pass the law amendment. The amendment would have added a statement to the SBC Constitution that defined a cooperating church as one that affirms, appoints, or employs only men as any kind of pastor or elder as qualified by Scripture. The amendment received 61% of the votes taken. A large majority, so that's a pretty good amount, but a few points short of the 2/3 vote that was what was needed. Dr. Denny Burke, that we mentioned before, a Kentucky Baptist pastor and professor at the Southern Baptist Seminary, stated in response to a social media post, the SBC still retains the right to remove any church it deems necessary to remove. So they can still kick out women pastors in churches that have them if needed. The fact that the amendment failed should in no way be interpreted that Southern Baptists affirm women serving in the role of pastor. One friend who cares deeply about these issues said to me, the SBC is likely more complementarian than at any point in its recent history. It has disfellowshipped more churches on the women pastor issue in the past 3 years than in the 21 other years combined since the passing of the BFM 2000. He says, Conclusion, the vote was not a rejection of complementarianism, but a disagreement over how it should be expressed. And you might be asking, okay, what exactly were they rejecting, the people that did reject it? So Susan Shaw says, some of those who opposed the amendment argued the convention has already spoken on the issue, has mechanisms to address churches with women pastors, and therefore does not need to amend its constitution. Nothing in this argument suggests support for women, and in fact, those opposing the amendment often affirmed their support for the denomination's stance against women pastors. So, in other words, they were trying to keep the main thing the main thing. They didn't need this extra stuff that said that women can't be pastors because it was already pretty clear. So that's pretty much it there. But there's one thing that I wanted to add, which I thought was really interesting. If you remember Danny Burke and what was the other guy? Whatever the guy's name was. They're like, hey, if we don't do this vote, if we don't vote against women pastors, then this is the authority of the Bible. This is just such a terrible thing that we have to vote against. And the churches, they're just going to go to liberal beliefs and LGBTQ and all this terrible stuff. This is really important, okay? So Scott Linky of Sacred Thoughts, I don't know if that's actually how you pronounce his name, but Linky, it just sounds like a nice way to say it. But he responded to this, and I thought it was really interesting. So he says, leaving aside any discussion on LGBTQ issues for now, here's the actual reality. The fastest growing group of Christians in the world, Pentecostals and Charismatics, who have now reached 650 plus million people, have been appointing women as pastors since the Azusa Street revival of 1906. So that's over 100 years ago. Not to mention, there are other groups such as Wesleyan churches, the Evangelical Presbyterian Church, etc. This is important because these groups are conservative in their beliefs. As seen above, many Southern Baptists believe appointing women is part of a trajectory that will lead to the full embracing of liberal beliefs, especially affirming same-sex marriage. But that's obviously not the case for every single instance, and in most of the instances. In fact, in my discussions with people that want women to be pastors, it's actually very difficult for me to find a liberal Christian. I find way more conservative people than liberal. At the same time, he adds, it's interesting that in his post, Burke also notes the decline of denomination to appoint women as pastors, yet the SBC has been in decline for 17 straight years now, and he ends, again, let's break out the mirror. Basically like, hey, honestly, you probably need to look more at yourself than these other things going on here. But anyways, that's what really happened. What are your thoughts? What do you think the SBC should do? Anything that I missed, let me know in the comments.